to the Introduction to Mental Health. I'm Mr. Perry. Today we'll be talking about mental health. Now, you may ask yourself, what is mental health? Well, mental health is the successful adaptation to internal and external stressors. This is evidenced by thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are age-appropriate and congruent with local and cultural norms. An individual with good mental health has an appropriate perception of reality. They also have the ability to accept themselves, others, and human nature. They have the ability to manifest spontaneity and the capacity for focusing concentration on problem solving. Occasionally, there's a need for detachment and a desire for privacy. Independence, autonomy, and resistance to enculturation are also aspects of mental health. The individual with good mental health has an intensity of emotional reaction and a frequency of peak experiences that validate the worthiness, richness, and beauty of life. There's an identification with humankind and the ability to achieve satisfactory interpersonal relationships. Individuals also have a democratic character structure and a strong sense of ethics. They are creative, and they have a degree of nonconformance. Our understanding of mental health has evolved a great deal over the years, and many theorists have contributed to this understanding. One such theorist, Abraham Maslow, posited that man's behavior was an underlying development, a quest, if you will, towards self-actualization. He put forth that there were 5 levels of needs that must be met before man could reach self-actualization. These levels are physiological needs, safety and security, love and belonging, self and others' esteem, and finally self-actualization. Let's take a look at them. Physiological needs are the basic needs of human life and include shelter, food, water, oxygen, sleep, exercise, and elimination. There is also a physiological need for sexual expression. And security needs include avoiding harm, maintaining comfort, order, structure, physical safety, freedom from fear, and protection. At the level of love and belonging, needs are for giving and receiving affection, companionship, satisfactory interpersonal relationships, and identification within a group. At the level of self-esteem and esteem of others, the individual seeks self-respect and respect from others, works to achieve success and recognition in work, and desires prestige from accomplishments. The pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization. The individual possesses a feeling of self-fulfillment and the realization of his or her highest potential at this level. The opposite of mental health is mental illness. Mental illness is a difficult concept to define. However, there are key elements associated with the perception of mental illness, regardless of cultural origin. These concepts are incomprehensibility and cultural relativity. Incomprehensibility relates to the inability of the general population to understand the motivation behind the behavior. When observers are unable to find the meaning of comprehensibility in behavior, they are likely to label that behavior as mental illness.
Pain by the multitude. Yeah, that's all that life's about. Darkness engulfs my heart every day, but ends up slipping out. Life for only a moment, a glimpse of the only way out. And all I got is lyrics, my legends, waterfall of the mouth. In and out of consciousness, left for only an hour. Shadows on my peripheral, I'm asking who like it now. Synchronicity is astounding. Never work. Struggle is necessary, whatever must come out. As stated before, cultural relativity plays an important part in defining mental health. So let's take a closer look at some of the
Cultural aspects of mental health. Cultural relativity considers that the rules, conventions, and understandings about behavior are conceived within an individual's own particular culture. Behavior is categorized as normal or abnormal according to one's culture or societal norms. Therefore, a behavior that is recognized as evidence of mental illness in one society may be viewed as abnormal in another society, and vice versa. The greater the cultural distance from the mainstream of society, that is, the fewer the ties with conventional society, the greater the likelihood of a negative response by society to mental illness. Women are more likely than men to recognize the symptoms of mental illness and seek assistance. In terms of religion, Jewish people are more likely than people who are Catholic or Protestant to seek psychiatric assistance. The more highly educated the person, the greater the recognition of mental illness behaviors. The higher the social class, the greater the recognition of mental illness behaviors. Individuals in the lowest socioeconomic class usually display the highest amount of mental illness symptoms. Psychiatrists see a person with mental illness most often when the family members can no longer deny the illness. It's usually members of the lay community rather than a psychiatric professional who initially recognizes that the individual's behavior deviates from the social norms. And finally, people who are related to an individual or who are of the same cultural or social group are less likely than someone who is relationally or culturally distant to label that individual's behavior as mental illness. Everything okay? Mental disorders have been defined by the American Psychiatric Association as a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbances in an individual's cognitions, emotional regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or developmental process underlying mental function. Mental disorders are usually associated with significant distress or disability in social, occupational, or other important activities. An expected or culturally approved response to a common stressor or loss, such as the death of a loved one, is not a mental disorder. As stated before, mental health is an adaptation to internal and external stressors. This adaptation takes place in both the body and the mind. First, let's take a look at some of the physiologic response to stress. The physiological response to stress is the flight or fight syndrome, also known as the general adaptation syndrome. This consists of 3 stages: the alarm reaction stage, the stage of resistance, and the stage of exhaustion. During the alarm reaction stage, the response of flight or fight syndrome are initiated. While flight is sometimes an appropriate response to stress, trying to escape from stressors of the world may not be beneficial. In the stage of resistance, the individual uses the physiological response of the first stage as a defense in an attempt to adapt to the stressor. If adaptation occurs, the 3rd stage is prevented or delayed. Physiological symptoms may disappear. The final stage is the stage of exhaustion. This stage occurs when there is prolonged exposure to a stressor to which the body has become adjusted. The adaptive energy is depleted and the individual can no longer draw from the resources for adaptation described in the first 2 stages. Diseases of adaptation include headaches, mental disorders, coronary artery disease, ulcers, colitis, and others, which may occur. Without intervention for reversal, exhaustion and even death ensues. The immediate biological response in the flight or fight syndrome includes sympathetic nervous system stimulation by the hypothalamus. This results in a bunch of physical effects, including the adrenal medulla releasing norepinephrine and epinephrine into the bloodstream. The pupils of the eye dilate for better sight. There's increased secretion in the lacrimal glands, and in the lungs, the bronchioles dilate and the respiratory rate is increased. The force of cardiac contraction increases, as does cardiac output, heart rate, and blood pressure. Gastrointestinal motility and secretions decrease, and sphincters contract. In the liver, there is increased glycogenolysis, and gluconeogenesis, and decrease glycogen synthesis. The bladder muscle contracts and the sphincter relaxes. There's increased ureter motility. Secretions from the sweat glands is also increased, and lipolysis occurs in the fat cells. If there's a sustained response to stress, where the stress is not relieved immediately, there are more effects that occur, including the adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulating the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids, and this results in increased glycogenesis and retention of sodium and water and decreased immune and inflammatory responses. Vasopressin increases fluid retention and also increases blood pressure through constriction of blood vessels. Growth hormone has a direct effect on protein, carbohydrate, and lipid metabolism, resulting in an increased serum glucose and free fatty acids. Thyrotropic hormone stimulates the thyroid gland to increase the basal metabolic rate, and gonadotropins cause a decrease in secretion of sex hormones, resulting in decreased libido and impotence.